Okay, guys, so I'm just going to jump into it. We are going to be moving pretty fast today. Just a heads up, I'm not going to be doing too much explaining of hypotheticals or why things work. We're just going to be coding. So yeah, if I'm going too fast, if you have a question, just holler at me, please. It's going to make it easier for both me and you. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is what is React? To put it super simply, React is JavaScript and HTML bundled together in the same place. It's a much more modern model. There's a bunch of different frameworks like React that you'll hear of, but React is the main one. I think 70% of the web is running on it at this point. So I have here a YouTube homepage up. We can notice some things about this homepage. Like we see a bunch of these tags are repeated up at the top. Gaming, music, news, dramedy, whatever. We see a bunch of videos repeated. We see a bunch on the left-hand side on the menu. We have a tag and we have an icon. This is something that React is really, really good at. If you guys remember Reed's airplane example, I think Reed had to manually type out like 700 seats or whatever it is, and then put the HTML in each one. A huge advantage of React is we can design a component and then map a list of data, which is our component data, and then generate a list of components. Now what I mean by that is let's look at these videos. Each video has a thumbnail. Each video has a name. Each video has views. So what you would do, hypothetically, is you would query your database for whatever our top 7 or whatever it is videos here to suggest to a user. You get their thumbnail object, you get their name, and you get their views. And then you can create just a thumbnail component. A thumbnail component takes all of those things, turns it into one component like so, and then using our map method, we can create an arbitrarily large number of these and put them on a page. And once you start seeing this design pattern, it's everywhere, right? Again, we got these videos, we got videos in trending, we've got the tags, etc. So we're just going to jump right into this. I could lecture to you all day about what this is, and we wouldn't actually get anywhere. We need to write some code. So let's start this out with a brand new directory. So where am I? You guys will all be making directories here. There we go. Cool. So we got VS Code open. We got a brand new directory, initializing my repo. And the first thing I'm going to do is add React to this project. So there's a line here. Let me see if I remember it. npx. You don't even have to remember it. Here's what this line is doing. We are basically bootstrapping a React application. This create React app is something that you can use. It's just a command line to give you the basics of what we need for a React app. It's being called my app. I don't care enough to change it. And this -- template means we're adding TypeScript to this. So I'm just going to run this. It's going to run for a couple minutes, maybe 1 or 2. If you guys can all run the same thing in your directories, let me know if you have any questions while this is running.
Can you make the command?
Yes, I can. Is that better?
Yeah, it's the one that's running the NPX.
npx and then the pink, yeah. So one thing, I touched on this for like 3 seconds. There's something called the DOM, which is the Document Object Model. What that is when you serve up an HTML document, every single thing on that page is an element of some type. We can look at divs or buttons or anything like that. To actually edit something on the page, we have to physically change the document object model as it stands. It's really tedious. The JavaScript is a bit of a nightmare. What React lets us do, if we zoom out a little bit, it creates a virtual DOM, edits it behind the scenes, and then renders it on the screen so that we're not editing things directly with JavaScript in a way that's sort of a nightmare. So we've got our React set up. If you guys have your React set up, we can jump in and make our first component here. But first I want to cd into this my app folder. Yeah, of course. Let me just type it in. I'm going to put this in the Slack, okay? You got it?
Yeah, throw it in the Slack. That'd be great.
Yeah. And that second command is one we'll be using later. Don't type it yet, I might have gotten it wrong. So here's we have node modules, doesn't matter. Public is our public files, so we have like icon. We have the actual HTML here. We see the HTML has an ID of root. There's this div here, which is ID root. There's nothing else in the HTML. A couple logos, manifest, not important. We see in our source, there's a bunch of stuff going on here. I'm not going to rip this all out, but the main thing we'll see is that there is an index.tsx. We'll see this root is the React DOM, which I mentioned, is the get element by ID root. So that's that div in the index.html file. And basically what we have here is the root.render. So it's rendering this application. And what's in the application? Well, we see React strict mode as a tag is wrapping app. So if we go to app, this is what we will actually see with all the CSS and whatnot if we run this. So if we're all CD'd into my app, we can just do, well, I'm not sure what the script is. Let's take a look. I think it's npm run start. Scripts start. So I'm going to do an npm run start. And this should open up this page on a local host. Cool. It'll probably open it automatically for you. Let me open one real quick. There we go. So if you go to localhost 3000 on your browser after you start this, this is the page that is currently being rendered by the Create React app. It just has a boilerplate. It always starts like this. We're going to rip it out. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm getting an issue when I put in the command like in Slack and I'm getting a bunch of errors and then it upworks it and releases it.
Leo's on it. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do, if we look at app, there's all this stuff going on in app. We can see that app is a function, and it returns, and this is where React starts to get cool. You mix the JavaScript with the HTML, and it's pretty simple to do once you know what you're doing. This is a div of class name app that's wrapping the header with the image. It's got the paragraph so you can see edit source app .tsx. The .tsx file and .jsx if you're doing JavaScript just means JavaScript and React. You just put an X on the end of the file. So I'm going to rip all this out. I'm going to kill the class name because we don't need it. Let's do a hello world. If you save it, boom. We immediately see that our screen is updated. Sometimes it doesn't update and you have to just refresh the cache or just restart the app, but for the most part, you're going to be good here. So this is the very first thing that I want to do is I want to create a new component. So I'm going to make two folders here. You can just right-click on source. I'm going to make a components folder. Components, yeah, it's spelled right. And going to make a pages folder. Now, if I want to do a component here, let's make a new file. My first component. Cool. So this is what components are going to look like. And immediately there's going to be problems because we're not actually exporting anything. So components can be classes or they can be functions. We're going to be doing the functional components. I think they're easier and more intuitive. I think Reed agreed with me, but I don't want to speak for him. So functional components it is. I'm never going to show you a class component. So const my first component. We always try to match. And I am using GitHub Copilot today because we got a lot of ground to cover. So right off the bat, this is our just normal ass normal component or normal function. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to return something. We'll be needing to return some HTML. So let's just do a div here. Hello world. So actually, this is a different component. So we're not rendering this component yet anywhere. We'll need to render it in app. So instead of having this h1 tag here, what we can do is we can do, and I'm so sorry, I always forget this. You guys are going to see me do this 10 times today. Export default my first component. If we don't export it, we can't use it. And then kill these guys. So over here, instead of a div being on h1 hello world, we can have a div wrapping my first component. Great. So now we have my first component on the actual page. You'll notice that this looks a little bit different than the div. Divs have these closing tags. So we have the opening div and the closing div. When we see a component like this with just the slash and then the less or greater than sign at the end of it, functionally this is the same exact thing here. There's not going to be a lot of differences. And you'll see this a lot in React, this just slash greater than sign. But yeah, that's our first component in React. If we want to do something a little bit more interesting, what if we wanted to, for example, put some actual JavaScript in here? Instead of saying hello world, let's have it say hello my name. So let's go to our component. So now we're in this component function. We're going to say const name string equals, great, name's going to be John. So this is really, really crucial. We can swap into JavaScript. So right now we're in, this isn't the official name for it, but I think of it as we're in HTML mode. We're going to swap into JavaScript mode by throwing 2 brackets up. If we throw the brackets up, now we're in JavaScript. So we can do name here, and this name variable references the name variable, same name. So if we save, hello John. If we don't go into these brackets, it's going to say hello name. So brackets brings us into JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever. Hello John. Simple enough. Questions? Cool. Gonna keep moving. So something that I'm going to do is I want to give you guys like 5 examples today, if we can get to all of them. To do that, I want to actually include routes in this application. Now, a route is something as simple as if we go to localhost/3000/button, /button is a route. It's just like a route on a website, same thing. So I'm going to add a router here to this application, just so that we're not constantly deleting code, writing more code, deleting, etc. So that you guys all have it in one place. So I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to open a new terminal here. Cool. And I'm going to npm install React Router DOM. I think I put it wrong in Slack. So if you guys can all install this as well, I'm going to put it in Slack. That should do that. Is that giving anybody trouble? We good? Cool. So we actually have routes now in this application, or we can add routes. So I'm going to go back to app. Instead of putting my first component here, I'm going to put, and this is not something that you would need to memorize. I looked this up before this class. I always look at the docs for this stuff. It's browser router. And we see that's in red. Let me see here. I missed an import somewhere. Sorry, one sec. Okay, so I did not cd into my app before I installed this dependency. So I'm going to uninstall this dependency, then cd into the actual app, and then reinstall. Now it should appear. Cool. So what I'm doing here is I do just a command period. Quick fix, add import from React Router DOM. Cool, now it knows what it is. So the next one, that's going to be wrapping routes. Same thing, update import. And then each actual route is going to have a path and an element. And again, we have to update the import for the route here. So I know I did that pretty quickly. Here's what's going on. Path is going to be just where in the application we're actually going to. So slash is just our home directory. So our home directory is going to be displaying the element here is my first component. That's it, nothing else. Yeah, so I'm going to add the next route here. I'm going to call it an array. So route path equals. So if we go to the array route, we'll be able to get that. And I'm going to make a component here called array page. Now that is not created yet. I'm going to make it right now. I called it array page. I'm actually going to put it in pages. So right click on pages, new file. Again, we're using .tsx. Just always have to be TSX if we have any HTML involved whatsoever. So, same thing. Let's make a function here. Const my, or I called it array page, equals. Now, if we want to do TypeScript, we should probably say what this actually is. This is a React functional component. It's not the end of the world if you miss this, but it's just nicer if it comes together. So, dear Lord, GitHub is Copilot is wonderful. I'm just going to press tab. So const names. So I'm going to basically have 3 usernames, and I want to display them all, much in the same way that we saw YouTube displaying a list of 7 videos. Basically, we're just taking that array and we're mapping each piece of the data. In that case, it was an object. Here, we're just going to have strings, and we're mapping them to components. So let's do some names. Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Does anybody have any questions? Anything outstanding? Const names. To give this a type, string. It's going to be an array of strings. Cool. It's complaining because I haven't exported. Why is that in my autocomplete? Don't like that. So we also have to return something. So we have to return our HTML. Every component that we make in React returns one. It doesn't have to be a div, but basically it's a HTML subtree or tree with one root. So what we can do here is we can do div and return nothing. That's fine. What we can't do is one div right over another, like this, because there's no root. Those are 2 things on the same level. There has to be something at the highest level. So we have a div, and what we want to do here is map each one of those strings. In this case, let's just map it to a paragraph tag that has their name in it. So we have to go into JavaScript to do that. Bracket. Names.map. So this is our map method that we talked about. So we need to map a name is what we can call it. It doesn't matter. It can be anything. Data. Data is really common. And index, the second parameter in this function is just the index of the array that we're in, and this is actually important here. So we do our function for mapping, and we're just going to do a p tag here. That's going to have, so we have to go back into JavaScript now because we want to have their actual name here. Data. And what we have to do, or should do, is index. Actually, we don't have to do this for this one. So this is at our array page. We're exporting default array page. Let's see. It's on our array page. I probably have forgotten something. App, array page. I need to import it. So command, period, add import. Let's take a look. Great. Again, we have this data. It's an array. Mapping an array into components is something you'll do every single day in React. Like it just never ends. You're constantly doing it. So that's just mapping these guys into an array. Now, if we wanted to get fancy, we could do something a little bit more complex. We could have like a div. Oh, I already lost my parentheses. Okay, so this is a div wrapping an h1. We could have a p tag in here. It can get as complicated as you want. This is a person. And so on and so forth. I'm so sorry. I forgot to close all of my messaging apps. What's up?
What is that key thing?
Oh, okay. Good call. So when we are mapping things into an array, the DOM has to keep track of what is what. Things need keys. So the best way to have a unique key, so just like think of like your typical key value data structure, keys have to be unique, right? So when we are mapping things in React, typically we use index here as part of the map, which is just the index of what something is in the array. And we just assign key to whatever we're mapping it to. If you don't do this, you can run into some really weird bugs. I think you don't have to do this for like H1 tags and stuff, but if you're using your own React components, you do, and I have run into stuff where I was banging my head against the wall. I think you don't have to do it for H1s and like native HTML. I'm not sure. You should do it. There's no reason not to.
It's mainly a performance thing because a lot of the times you'll have like dynamic stuff that are being mapped, and so it's a way that lets the virtual DOM know exactly what element to update, and so it's like an optimization.
In addition to being optimization, if you have two things that have, for example, the same string, like you have two users whose name is Sarah, and you say delete Sarah, you got to delete a unique key. And the only way to have something like guaranteed unique values by having the index. So, moving on. So now we can get data that's static, and we can display that on the page however we want. Let's make a button. This is like the classic first example in React. Make a button, it increments a counter. So now we can actually change variables ourselves. So I don't want to delete all this. I'm just going to make a new route for you guys. Route. So I'm in app.tsx. So this is going to be on the /button page. Element is going to be, I'm going to just call it a first button, or because I'm going to make 2 buttons today. So I'm just going to make this in the pages to keep it simple. This crashed because it doesn't know what first button is. Again, TSX always const my, or first button. I'm going to show you guys this once, and then I'm never going to do it again because we're learning. There's something called snippets that you can get, and I can just type RH, and it gives me exactly what I need to be able to make this component. That said, because we're learning, I'm not going to be doing that. Const first button. So first button is a React functional component. And first button will be button click me and a counter. So, yeah, what's up?
What does the p tag do again?
It's just a paragraph, just regular text. I'm just keeping it simple for this one. I'm not trying to do anything fancy graphically. I'm just trying to communicate React concepts. You can get as intricate as you want with this HTML, but P is like the most basic, really. H1 would be like the header tag. So there's something in React called hooks. We're going to be talking about hooks a little bit more in about 10 minutes. But hooks are essentially a way that I think of it as connecting our data to the actual DOM itself, or the virtual DOM, I should say. Here's an actual example of that, so it's not just words that could mean anything. Const count. It already knows what I'm going to do. Absolutely love it. I'm going to tweak this a little. So it already doesn't know what this is. Again, to get my imports, command, period, add import from React. Cool. So this is an array. This array has two things in it. It has something called count. It has something called set count. We are declaring this array by using this method called useState. Now React hooks are almost always, I think they are always, use state, use ref, use context, use memo. It's just use something. This number just means that this has to be a number. Count can never be anything except a number. We'll see that this isn't unique to useState. You've seen me do this in other times briefly. Just saying that this value, this 0, has to be a number. And 0 just means we're initializing the 0. Here's something that we can never, ever, ever do in 10 million years. It will never work. Count equals. Does not work. Count is not a variable like that. If we want to modify count, we have to do so with this set count. Set count is a special function given to us from React that's going to allow us to use state and modify state. Now, when I talk about state, what I mean is it's essentially a variable that's hooked up to the virtual DOM that we can modify as we want. There's a process by which a component attaches itself to the virtual DOM. It's called mounting. And then once it does that, you're ready to start using state with it. I don't want to get too far into the hypotheticals. Let's show you how you actually do this state stuff. So const handle click equals okay. So we have basically a wrapper function here. Handle click, regular old function, is setting count to whatever count is plus 1. So this, we could also call this increment if we wanted. No real difference. What we're going to do is with a button, there's a button, you can do something on click equals, and now we're back in JavaScript because we have those brackets. Handle click. Compiler error. Oh. Export default first button. My GitHub Copilot learned to put 4 tick marks at the end of something. I don't know why. So now we go back to app. First button we actually need to import. See if it works. Cool. So now I think the route here was button. Anthony, all of this is going to be available. I have a GitHub on my personal page that I'm going to link at the end of the class.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to kind of see what's going on. My eyes aren't too great.
You're good.
Thanks.
Oh, and the reason why it's not displaying count is because I did not tell it to display count. So the count is count. So back into JavaScript, display our count. Click, 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 great. That's what our state is. This is the most simple example of state that I can give you guys. If we refresh this page, what do you guys think is going to happen to the counter? Yeah.
I guess it'll reset.
It's going to zero out. Yeah, exactly. React is not a database. We're not saving this to some database somewhere. We're not caching it in our web browser. We're not caching it on local machines. As soon as we navigate away from this page, count's gone. The component will have to mount again. And when it mounts, we told it to mount with 0. Cool. Are there any questions? I know that this is a lot in a very short period of time. Cool. The goal today is that we're going to build a to-do list. I want to show you one more thing first before we jump into that. And this is, you can make your own hooks in React. Now we've talked about useState. I mentioned a few others. Basically, you make your own hook that works with some of React's pre-built-in functions. This is a little bit more advanced. I want to get to it today because we'll find it useful for making a to-do list. So I'm going to make a better button now. So I'm going to go back to app. Button 2. I'm going to call it second button. Just make a new page. CSX. I wanted to make a nav bar to make this easy to move between, but I think we're going to run out of time on that. Const second. Okay, so let's talk about what we want to actually do for our hook here. Let me just get a return statement so it stops yelling at me. I can fix that later. So we're going to call our hooks use something. I'm just going to call this one use button. So same thing, this is just going to be a regular old arrow function. Now in this button, here's what we're going to do for this page. We want one button that increments a counter, one button that decrements a counter, decrements, sorry, and we want the actual state for the count. So we want 3 things coming from this hook. We'll notice that use state had a set count and a count itself. You can call them whatever you want, but basically state and set state. This one's going to have an increment state, decrement state, and the actual state itself. So we're going to need to use use state for that. So this is the same exact line as earlier. So I'm going to call this function increment. Cool. It's already got it. So set count is count plus 1. And then const decrement. Set count minus 1. So we have this function. We're not returning anything so far. We need to return something. We need to make these, the state and these actual 2 functions that we wrote usable outside of this function. So we're going to return count, increment, and decrement. Now these can be used outside of this hook. If I was writing just a button that needed to increment and decrement something, I wouldn't write a special hook for it. This is something that you might do if it's coming up a lot in your application or if it's something that's extra complicated. I just wanted to show you guys how to do it. So over here, here's how we actually access those. Before we were doing, it was a const array for use state. This is going to be constant object for use button. So now we get count, we get increment, and we get decrement. So we're going to do count is count. And just as before, on click equals, well, we just want to pass in our increment function. Let's check this out. It's button 2. I botched it. Oh, it's over an app. Oh, you'll see me do this a lot. Command P brings up the list of our files. I'm just going to type in app, enter. It's a quick way to navigate when you got 30 million files going on. So I'm going to import this. Again, command period, add import. Cool. Looking good. Let's hope it works. So increment, decrement. We see that this one instance of state for count is being controlled by 2 different buttons here. Same thing. It's just we used a custom hook that we wrote ourselves to do so. Anybody have any questions? What's up, Reed?
Can you navigate back to the button 2?
Yeah.
I think this is just a point that is important. On the on-click handler,
Mhm.
there's no parentheses around the function, because I think a common mistake that'll happen is you'll try and put like opening and closing parentheses around increment, thinking that it's a function. But what you really are passing to on-click is a function. And so if you were to actually put the two parentheses in, like after the increment and decrement, it'll run that function as it's rendering, which is not what you want.
We'll immediately see. Does not like it. This is a huge advantage of TypeScript. TypeScript's immediately going to yell at us and say this is wrong. This error message doesn't really make sense. I'm going to be real. There's a lot going on if you don't really know exactly what all these types are. One advantage or one technique that I would recommend if you get some function like onClick or onSubmit or onChange or whatever, and you're not quite sure what the form of the function is, get rid of brackets at the end, which shouldn't really ever be there. You can also try, now this will not work here. See, it's not incrementing. But we will be doing this a little bit later today if I can get to it. Anyhow. Moving on. Let's make a to-do list. I guess that's sort of like the other obvious thing that like you do in every language is making to-do lists. So a to-do list is going to consist of two things for us. A page with some other stuff on it, and then a bunch of to-do items, which we can check off as we complete them. So I'm going to make a new page. To-do page.tsx. And this, we're going to start talking about props in this one as well, and child components and things like that, which are very important. So const to-do page, let's give it the React functional component. So I'm going to be wanting to return. Right now, let's just say a div that's going to wrap, I don't know, an h1 to-do page. Great. Cool. And let me make a route for this in my app. We can go to this in our local host. To-do page. Cool. So my goal for this page is I want a text box up here that is going to allow us to enter some to-dos, put it on our list, take them off later. So now if we go to this list, the way I see this is that this should have many children. Your to-do list can be very long. Just like our YouTube example, just like on our array mapping example, we're going to be mapping our to-do information to a list of, in this case, components, where each component is a to-do. And we're going to see how this makes React really easy to write lots of HTML, where if we were doing raw HTML, it would be very tedious. So our to-do page is over here. I'm going to make a to-do item, which is going to show just what a to-do will actually be. So that'll be a component. It won't be a full page. To-do item.tsx. Now we haven't really talked about this yet, but you can pass in values. Actually, I'm sorry, we did. When we were mapping our names, we can pass in values into these components. So what I would want to pass into this component for sure is going to be the to-do, actually the text. So to do that, I'm going to make an interface here, to-do item props. We call them props. It's just what you pass into a component. I actually am now realizing I've never heard it called properties. It's just always called props. So text is going to be a string. So this is just our interface declaration of a new type that we're creating. That looks exactly right. I'm going to type it out though. So before you were seeing me type out react.fc and nothing after it, the angle brackets and then the type inside refers to the type that we are passing in into our function. So if we do to-do item props, but we've talked about destructuring a little bit, which is taking an object and turning it into all of its fields. I don't want to type props.text every time I need to deal with this. So I'm going to destructure this and just type text. So to-do item is going to be very simple for now. I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated later. To-do item is going to have the text of what the actual item is. And it's also going to have a button right next to it. I don't have time to put it in a container. We would be writing the CSS to put this into a container and have them next to each other. I'm going to put a button to check it off. And, complete. That button has no functionality yet whatsoever. Let's head back to the to-do page. So we're probably going to need a form on here in order to get some actual text that we can type into. This is a form tag. In the form, we need an input, which is type text. I'm just going to press tab. We get add on a button here. This is going to be add to do. So what we're going to need to do is be able to take this text that's in here and create a component from that text. Now, we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to use a hook very similar to the one that I used before. Create to do, remove to do, a list of to-dos. Now, our list of to-dos is going to be an array. So const use to do. Okay, so this is just ripping code that I wrote before, but I do want to type this out. So to-dos in our set to-dos, this is our use state. To-dos is going to be our state that we're controlling. Set to-dos is just going to be our function that we use to change our to-dos. Equals use state. Now this has got to be a string. And we want to start this off as an empty array. That's very important. If we're not starting this off as anything, initializing it to nothing, it's going to initialize to null. This is just going to create problems for you guys. Always initialize to a value wherever it makes sense. And of course, we need to import use state from React. String array, not a string. So next we have add to do. Well, what we want to do, we talked about spreading with our arrays. We want to take our current array, spread that into a new array, and then add the next to do at the very end of it. If we just try to, I don't know, say to-dos is equal to to-dos plus or whatever we want to do, we must use set to-dos here. We simply have to. This isn't like an optimization thing. This is just how React works. So we're going to lowish on time. So we have our function here, add to do. We pass in a string, which is going to be our new to do. We set to-dos. So this is a method. We spread our to-dos into it. And then we just add text. So that'll be the last to do on the list. Now, const remove to do. So we talked about having indices for our values and whatnot. Now what if we had two different tasks that said mow the lawn? And then we said, okay, well, let's just filter out our list of when we want to remove the lawn or mow the lawn. We can't just filter through this array and take out everything that says mow the lawn. We may have two values. We need to use an index here to keep track of which to do is which. So that's why I'm going to use an index as a number. And this is just going to be set to do's Now there's a filter method, which I don't think I had time to mention when I was talking about JavaScript arrays. Filter just says, take out anything that doesn't match this expression that I have coming next. So we have todos.filter. So this is an array method. So we're in the method. Now we have to do another anonymous method in here. Typically we would type data in index, or we already have index, so I. So whenever I doesn't equal index, let's keep that, sorry, the screen's getting small. So we're filtering out everything that is this index. We're keeping everything that where the index is not that index. You'll see how we're not actually using data. What we can do here, this is just a little optimization thing. Just put an underline if there's an unused variable. The reason why we can't just have I is because now it thinks that I is the data, not the actual index. Index always comes second here. So now we have use to do, add to do, and remove to do. Now we wrote a hook. We need to return those three things as an object. So return, this looks exactly right to me. To do's, add to do, and remove to do. So let's see if we can add a to do before we start getting into removing them. We also want to display them on the page because right now we're not displaying anything. So right under this, we need to map our to-dos. So we need to go into JavaScript, to-dos.map. Now we need the to-do and the index. And we're not mapping it to a div like GitHub Copilot thinks. We're putting it in the to-do item. So to-do item. Did I not export that? You see when I don't get the autocomplete, I'm immediately looking for why I'm not getting autocomplete. Just makes everything easier. To-do item. Great. Now we'll need a specific key for each item on this list. Key should always be the index. We need a text that we're passing in, right? Well, we're passing in text there. Let's make an index, which will be a number, which we'll use for something else later as well. To do item. I've broken something. Sorry, 1 second. Oh, so I actually declared this hook, or I wrote the hook. Didn't actually grab it, so I need to do const and actually get the values from the hook. There we go. So now we're looking good. I'm not seeing any errors. We're not using add to do or remove to do yet, so we need to do add to do. So what we want to do is when we click add to do, we want, just like the button on the count, we want the button for that to be on click, add to do. I have broken something and I'm not sure why. Yeah, it's not going to work. Sorry, 1 second. I think it's how I'm handling my form. Let me double check. I wrote this 2 minutes ago. Reed, do you see it?
Where are you getting your...
Text and event. I think it's because it's a form.
Well, it's because you're not, what do you add? What to do again?
I'm sorry?
You have to pass it.
I'm so sorry. I jumped ahead of myself. Thank you. So we also need to keep track of what's actually in this box, which I had not been doing. So it looks like we're going to have to use state again. Let's call it input. Set input. Use state string. This one's actually a string, not an array of strings. Yeah, I know. So we want something called handle change, which is going to be whenever the values of this change, we need to update input with whatever the actual values of the box or the form are. So const handle change. you'll see that this is a E. We use E to talk about events. Events are things that happen on web pages. This is like a super 10-second explanation. There are a lot of different types of events. The event that we're going to be discussing this time is what happens when the text in the box changes. Now you don't need to memorize the types for these. I usually let autocomplete do it, or you copy and paste them for somewhere else. But what we care about is e.target.value. That one, if you remember anything, just remember e.target.value. So what happens is we want to set input to be e.target.value. Now every single time this changes, sorry, give me 2 seconds. Every single time it changes, if we pass in this handle change function into the actual form here, sorry. I'm making a dumb mistake and I want to see what I did that was not the dumb mistake. Yeah, it was unchanged handle change. Now it likes to handle change, and I'm not sure. Oh, I put it in the form, didn't I? I didn't put it in the input. Thank you. Okay. So now we need to handle submit. Essentially what just happened there was I put handle change in the wrong place. Handle change has to be on changes in the input here, where input, the value is equal to the input that we have up here. Handle change, every time it changes, we call the handle change function, which will be set in the input. Now we need to handle the actual submit. So const handle submit. So we just want to take whatever the input is and then add the to-do. That's simple. Let me get rid of that for now. I think this should do it. Cool. So we can now add to-dos. Let me make one that isn't. And we'll see, we can do this forever until our computer runs out of memory. Let's make sure that we can actually remove them now. We got about 5 minutes left. So here's something that's interesting. The state of these to-dos is controlled at the level of the page. That's where the state lives. Now, in these child components, each child component has a complete button. Those complete buttons are part of the child component. So what we have to do is something called raising the state up. Because they're going to be accessing state that exists at the parent level, and these are the child components. We have to give from the parent component, and this is going to make more sense when I do it, from the parent component, we have to give it the remove to-do function. The remove to-do function is then accessed essentially by the child component, which is to-do item, and then can modify state at the parent level. It's a little bit confusing. You can go arbitrarily deep on this. It's probably one of the pitfalls of React is when you need to get really, really drilling deep for props. But let's take a look. So to-do item, it just has a text and an index right now. Let's give it a function. Remove. Yep, that's right. So remove is just a function here that's going to take an index and returns void. I want to do remove when I click the button. Which it doesn't like yet because the text index remove. So remove is actually calling an index here, or it's the index is being passed into remove, but it doesn't like that. I need to actually pass this into to-do item. Remove equals, called it remove, yes. So remove equals, sorry, the function's here somewhere. Remove to do. Yeah. I want to say, okay, let me double check. Awesome. So I'm going to explain what I just did there in 2 seconds. We can add an arbitrary amount of to-dos. If I had 2 of them with the same one, we're not getting rid of both of them. We're getting rid of the specific to-do. Then everything else just bumps up in the list automatically. The cool thing about React is that the entire page is not re-rendering every time we do this. The virtual DOM is only dealing with elements that need to change and changing those, making React, I don't want to say it's performant. They're making strides, but it's definitely better than raw JavaScript. So let me take a look at this function here and explain a little bit what's going on in the last 2 minutes that we have. Remove is a function that takes an index. We are passing in the index. We are passing in remove. Remove is a function that comes from the parent component, as does index, as does the actual text and the to-dos. In this particular case, if we did this, we're going to get an error. There's a whole bunch of TypeScript errors on here. They're kind of tedious to read until you get a feel for what TypeScript errors actually look like. Honestly, this isn't the academic on paper way to do it. Whenever I see an on click or like an on remove or an on whatever, like I said, I immediately give it a function that's passing nothing that returns or executes remove index, and then we're good. We have 1 minute left. I know that was a lot in a very short period of time. I keep saying that. Questions? Did that make any sense? Did you guys follow at least a little bit? More or less? So what happened with me is I sat down and I read the docs in React for like 3 hours. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this all now. And then I couldn't do anything. You just have to write it yourself. The goal for my 3 courses of React are going to be explaining what's going on, showing you the basics of stuff that you'll be using every day, and then you're turned loose to deal with it yourselves. We're going to start next lesson. We're going to start talking about use effect, which is basically when we need to go to an API or somewhere over a network or a database, get some information from somewhere else, and then bring it back. It also has more uses beyond just that, but that's one that you absolutely have to use it for. I'm going to call it a minute early. I think we're ending on time today for once. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all tomorrow. If you have any questions, hit me up. I'm going to be lingering.